We're picking up here in chapter 15. Edna and Robert have grown close on Grand Isle. Nothing has happened here that I think that would be socially unacceptable. We do see Madame Radignoli express some nervousness toward Robert about his interaction with Edna. He sees Edna as being her being in a vulnerable state, and not someone who really would be good to be flirted with. Robert doesn't really follow her instructions, although eventually, as this relationship develops, Robert senses something that perhaps Edna doesn't even sense herself. There's this conversation. "I don't want to be part of any ill humor," Edna says to Robert. "But can't you understand? I've grown used to seeing you." Now, this is the point in the text where Robert senses that there's more than just a friendship. There's something that's inappropriate now in his mind, and he's leaving to go to Mexico, right? And she says, "I've grown used to seeing you, to having you with me all the time, and your action seems unfriendly, his moving away, even unkind. You don't even offer an excuse for it. Why, I was planning to be together, thinking of how pleasant it would be to see you in the city next winter." "So was I," he blurted. "Perhaps that's the—" Cuts off. He stood up suddenly and held out his hand. "Goodbye, my dear Mrs. Pontellier, goodbye. I hope you won't completely forget me." She clung to his hand, striving to detain him. "Write to me when you get there, won't you, Robert?" "I will, thank you, goodbye." How unlike Robert. The merest acquaintance would have said something more emphatic than, "I will, thank you, goodbye," to such a request. This is part of Edna's thought process, right? So Robert begins to feel something real for Edna, something beyond the friendship, and that would be inappropriate. Edna is still walking aimlessly across that field that we mentioned before, right? Edna's childlike vision. This is her childlike view of the situation. She's not seeing it as flirtation. She's not seeing it as dangerous. And Robert says, perhaps that's the problem, right? He doesn't say the problem. The fact is they are too close, and he sees it. She does not. Robert, in some ways, you might say, has swum out too far, and he knows it. He's swum out farther than he wants to. If we read the story symbolically, that Edna's journey is symbolic, not literal, we can avoid the awkward idea of rooting for Edna to have an extramarital affair. I have no desire to root on someone to have an extramarital affair. That disturbs me in many ways, obviously, because it's immoral and obviously unjust for someone to be unfaithful. But from a symbolic point of view, from a symbolic reading in this text, we see Edna as one who is oppressed by society, and we see her moving on a journey of awakening. Chopin includes enough hints at the awakened journey, the throwing off of oppressive ideas and harmful limiting roles. Well, our next section here, chapter 17. She says this. That's not it. In chapter 17, it says this. She went and stood at an open window and looked out upon the deep tangle of the garden below. All the mystery and witchery of the night seemed to have gathered there amid the perfumes and the dusky and tortuous outlines of flowers and foliage. She was seeking herself and finding herself in just such sweet half-darkness which met her moods. But the voices were not soothing that came to her from the darkness and the sky above and the stars. They jeered and sounded mournful notes without promise, devoid even of hope. She turned back into the room and began to walk to and fro down its whole length, without stopping, without resting. She carried in her hands a thin handkerchief, which she tore into ribbons, rolled into a ball, and flung from her. Once she stopped, and taking off her wedding ring, flung it upon the carpet. When she saw it lying there, she stamped her heel upon it, striving to crush it. But her small boot heel did not make an indenture, not a mark, upon the little glittering circlet. All right, so symbolic elements here in this passage as well. Nature and the open window. Now, when I think of Edna looking out this open window, I immediately flash back to Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I don't know if you're familiar with that text, but it's a very famous Victorian novel written just before this one, and no doubt Chopin would have read it. It's about the journey of a woman to independence. Sound familiar? about a journey of a woman to independence. And so here Edna is on the similar kind of journey, looking out the window. Her journey is connected to nature, to the rhythms of the created universe. And this is in opposition to the man-made structure of the patriarchy, the male-dominant society. There is a half-darkness that pervades. Looking back to this description Edna provides of her walk through the field. Remember that field that she walked through as a girl? Her bonnet pulled down, limiting her vision. Here, in a very similar way, we have Edna that is frustrated by limited vision. She's frustrated by a lack of insight and how to proceed. A jeering and mournful sky above her beckon her to walk by faith, to walk alone and find courage. The ring, she stomps on the ring. The ring, perhaps here, can be seen as a symbol of her bond with Leonce. A bond that literally is bondage. It is binding her to a set of expectations, a limiting view of what it means to be a woman. And this is what she seeks to stomp on. If we jump over to chapter 19, there's a very similar one here to this, a similar statement that kind of builds upon this idea. It sometimes entered Mr. Pontellier's mind to wonder if his wife were not growing a little unbalanced mentally. He could see that plainly, that she was not herself. That is, he could not see that she was becoming herself and daily casting aside the fictitious self which we assume like a garment with which to appear before the world. Now, I think Kate Chopin kind of shows the cards here, right? She's casting aside what? The fictitious self. Chopin basically is saying here, Leonce doesn't get it for sure. Edna doesn't really understand it, but she knows more than Leonce does. Edna is moving toward freedom, moving toward independence, emancipation. All right, moving forward here, we have in chapter 21, she says this, or she writes this, and moreover, to succeed, the artist must possess the courageous soul. What do you mean by the courageous soul? Courageous, ma foi. The brave soul, the soul that dares and defies. Sorry, I should give a little lead up here. So here in chapter 21, we have Edna goes and visits Madame Ritz at Madame Ritz's house. And they're talking about art. And Edna is asking questions. And she asks about what it is to be an artist. And Madame Ritz says, to be an artist, to succeed as an artist, you must have a courageous soul. You must have a soul that dares and defies. Chopin's connection between Ritz and Edna, a married woman and a widow. I mentioned this before. The widows have freedom in this society. We see the text connecting Edna's journey with a journey of a classic hero. Another one of those classic structures that are flipped, right? The classic, we see the text connecting Edna's journey with a classic hero. One who must stand against the forces of authority. One who must challenge harmful giants of oppression. And that is Edna, who must dare and defy. Well, let's jump to chapter 22. And here we see Leonce really kind of developing in his anxiety. He goes to his friend, Dr. Mandelet. He says this, she's got some sort of notion in her head concerning the eternal rights of women. And you understand, we meet in the morning at breakfast table. The doctor replies, has she? Asked the doctor with a smile. Has she been associating of late with a circle of pseudo-intellectual women? Superior spiritual beings? My wife has been telling me about them. Now this is a fascinating section. Leonce goes obviously to his friend, and Mandelet describes this new movement of pseudo-intellectual women. Well, historically speaking, we have an interesting historical connection here, because in May of 1869, a woman you might know her name was Susan B. Anthony, and another name, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In 1869, they formed what was called the National Woman Suffrage Association. The primary goal of the organization? To achieve voting rights for women, to create a congressional amendment, an amendment to the Constitution. Well, in 1826, 1920, after the text was published here, though, That is when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was made, and that granted women to vote. Well, it's interesting here that Dr. Mandalay is talking about this movement of women, right? Which definitely is a reference to Susan B. Anthony and this development of the Women's Suffrage Association, pushing toward the rights to have women voting and to have the Constitution amended. Well, Mandalay's advice, leave her alone, man. Nature will take its course. I think this is an ironic element here that Chopin includes. Nature will take its course. Nature has already taken its course, buddy, right? We might say as reader. Nature's already taken its course, and nature is what is leading Edna Pontellier to do just what she's doing, to throw off the oppression of patriarchy and to seek independence, to become an independent agent, not needing the association of men and the covering of a man anymore, that has oppressed her and kept her from becoming the woman that she was made to be. No longer is she willing to be fit into a box that is called woman in society. She wants to redefine this, not necessarily redefine it for all women, but for herself. She wants to find freedom, to be emancipated from the harmful limitations society has placed upon women.